Hello, and welcome to the LA Venture Podcast. This is Minnie Ingersoll, host of the podcast and partner at 10110. 10110 is a seed stage fund here in LA. All opinions expressed on this show by me and my guests are solely our own. If you are interested in LA Venture, go to 10110.net/podcast, where I've made a sortable list of all of the great LA VCs who've been on this show. Brian Garrett is one of my favorite partners at Crosscut, and I've always appreciated, Brian, your very warm welcome when I first moved to LA. Crosscut has been investing since 2008, but they've evolved a lot over the years, and I am excited to hear about Crosscut V2.
Sure. You can call it V2, call it the evolution.
Yeah, great TechCrunch article came out today. Very interested to hear what's changing, what's staying the same.
I think Rick, Brett, and I have done a lot of reflection over the last 2 years. It's been an interesting time in venture, as we all know, and the SoCal community is stuck together and continue to fight the fight. Capital raising is not easy unless you're a tier one Silicon Valley brand. I think we started to look at what does it take to get up every day and do this job with vigor, and what is the product that probably has the best chance of winning in the market as it stands today. And that's a very different answer than what we had and what we started with in 2008. And I think to not acknowledge that is to not, like any company, you have to stay on top of the competitive market space. You have to figure out product market fit. You have to do all that work to understand what resonates. The other piece for at least me is that my intellectual curiosity has really gone for the last 5-6 years into this FrontierTech realm. I wake up thinking about the world that we're leaving our kids, and I reflect a lot around the damage that's being done, even with all of this amazing innovation. And so both my intellectual interest, my consciousness, and a bunch of other things, I think, have driven us as a partnership in this direction for what we're now calling FrontierTech.
Yeah. I mean, I reviewed our podcast we did 5 years ago. You were actually talking about FrontierTech 5 years ago when you came on the podcast the first time.
I'm glad to hear that. I mean, again, we've said it all along. We've been terrible at marketing ourselves, right? Like, we've never made an effort to market Crosscut. I think we were known as 3 good guys that did right by the community and tried to connect dots and help people and played some small role in the success of SoCal Tech. But it was never about us taking credit for it. That's just not our DNA. So yeah, I've been doing FrontierTech investing since 2017, 2018. The first check we wrote here was in a satellite company in Santa Barbara called Umbra Space.
I want to ask you more about it, but let's stick with the getting out of bed and getting motivated. Are Rick and Brett and the team, are you guys all doing the same thing or doing different things?
We're all doing the same thing, maybe playing slightly different roles. Rick's really interested in more climate-related solutions, and Brett does what Brett does. He's fantastic in building the network and getting people excited about our story. So there will certainly be some changes coming. As referenced in the article, we'll be announcing a new partner pretty soon who's got a growth and infrastructure background with a focus around energy and power generation. We define FrontierTech as energy, power, advanced manufacturing, advanced materials, and space, defense, and security, right? So nearshoring of our supply chain, thinking about the kind of stuff that's happening in what we're calling the techno-manufacturing revolution of Southern California.
And how much of that would you say is SpaceX?
I will give credit to SpaceX, but I would also say it's Tesla, it's Hyperloop, it's the prime contractors and their 70+ year history here. It really tends to be more of what I describe as like a mechanical engineering orientation or a systems engineering orientation versus a computer science orientation, right? And not that LA was ever like the deep computer science hub. Obviously, Silicon Valley is that, and the evolution of AI and all that stuff, I give that to SF. But down here, we've been designing and building hard shit for a very long time. And that's the DNA of the founders that I am spending time with and that I find to be really lofty in their ambitions and very much a principles first orientation to solving big problems. And that's why I get out of bed every day.
And given that software and hardware companies are just very different to build, does that mean that your fund construction is changing a lot?
We have basically launched a new growth practice, and the idea there is we want to come in and be able to do what we've been doing for 16 years and meet for 23 years. writing seed and Series A checks in the $500K to $3 million range, part of $2 to $6 million rounds, and really working to help the entrepreneur achieve the next milestones, right? That's our history. But what's unique about FrontierTech is that there isn't a lot of capital sitting in that growth stage. And there's even less capital sitting at what we call the project infrastructure and project finance bucket. And so we're looking to be able to grow and scale the platform of Crosscut to provide a full stack solution to these companies. And we can do it in a couple of ways. We can invest at seed. If we miss you at seed, we can still come in at call it a B or a C round. And we're going to do that through an SPV practice with a broad set of family offices that are mission aligned in solving humanity's biggest problems. We fight hard by doing market maps and thesis generation. And we've done that now in advanced nuclear fission. And so we've looked at 35 companies in advanced nuclear fission, not fusion. And we have identified 4 that we think are going to outperform and win. And we're starting to syndicate opportunities in those companies, right? So that gives us a chance to pull in capital on some higher profile deals that are maybe a little further along in their development.
And do you worry that your seed stage investments then get very diluted?
So there is certainly risk there, but I think you can de-risk that through a couple things. The first is non-dilutive grants, which there's never been more momentum behind the dollars coming from our 3-letter organizations across our government. We also have a ton of bipartisan momentum around any alternative energy source, given the passing of the IRA. And so those dollars are now being made available. We have a company that we haven't announced that 3 weeks after our funding got an $80 million DOE grant to build out their factory.
Wow. How did they get 80 million?
Yeah, it's understanding how things scale from what I call, the ARPA and DARPA grants to the SBIRs, to the AFWorks, to the DOE, DOD, and the Loan Program Office. And every single one needs an end customer that is saying, please spend money on this because it's important to me. And we've spent the last 3.5 years mapping those sources of capital to make sure we have relationships at the right places. It's also really critical, not just for non-dilutive equity, but it's also about this regulatory environment around nuclear, right? Understanding which emerging advanced microreactors are better positioned to get approved faster.
Yeah. Okay, well, keep going on that then. So you've been looking at fission.
Correct. Yeah.
Tell me your thesis around fission, nuclear.
Yeah. So my new partner has done most of the work there. The net of it is you either are betting on fusion, companies like Commonwealth Fusion Systems. They're already sitting at an $8-10 billion valuation. And they are, in my opinion, a binary bet that if they get it right, they're going to be one of the most valuable companies that we've ever seen, right? But that's fusion technology, and that's new, and it's a bunch of people with theories around how to bring it to commercial scale around lab-related stuff. And they tend to be more related to large-scale magnets and the ability to run fusion in a reactor at scale. Fission is a proven technology, right? We've been using nuclear fission since the 50s, 60s. Well, what's happening in fission is there's not only all the news these days, right, are about Microsoft and Google and Amazon turning back on old multi-gigawatt reactors like 3 Mile Island. And that's great. We need that. We need clean baseload energy. Those are proven systems. They haven't aged out. But what's coming that I think is super interesting are these Gen 3, Gen 4 advanced microreactors, right? And these are much smaller in scale, call it 1 to 50. And they tend to have greater portability, greater manufacturability, different fuel sources, different cooling systems, and different economies around them. And I think they're going to open up markets that haven't even existed before. So they will replace fossil fuel-based systems like diesel generators all over the globe that require huge supply chains and a very large cost of fuel. These will be renewable, portable, put them on a plane, drop them in, power up small little villages, power up army bases. And then when they're out of fuel, pull them out, fly them back, refuel them, bring them back in, slot them in like a Lego block. And Certainly, they'll be solving aspects of the hyperscaler data center energy consumption problem, but they tend to be more augmentative or auxiliary power sources versus fully behind the meter solutions that a lot of people are trying to build. The reason we like that is we think it's going to come to market a lot faster.
Wow. I mean, do you like this? Yes, it's leaving the world a cleaner place for your children, but do you like it because you just get to nerd out and learn about the fueling and magnets and energy production? Like, is that just intellectually fun for you?
It is. I mean, that's honestly, you wake up at 50 and you've been doing this for 23 years and you're kind of like, can I get excited about another XYZ? For me, probably the most interesting deal that I've done in a long time was my satellite deal. It's Umbra, right? That was a $900K check written in January of 2018, right after we raised Fund 4. And I went and met the CEO, David, and he told me a story of, how this antenna was going to unfold and take better pictures than anything that exists up there built by our government and our prime contractors. And I was like, ooh, that's what can be. And that's what makes venture fun, right? It's what can be. And then as you start to nerd out on technically how you can do this stuff, yeah, I go deep into the white papers. I love learning. That's always been kind of my secret trick in venture. I'm just a voracious reader of stuff.
And how much does supporting a company building a nuclear reactor feel the same or totally different as supporting a more typical B2B SaaS company?
Yeah, I would say that company building is company building, right? And as I mentioned when we started, right, setting milestones and properly capitalizing a business to get there, it doesn't matter what category you're in. Even D2C, right? It's how many subscribers do we need? Whereas in this case, it's how much money do you need to build a prototype reactor? And when you do, where there'll be capital behind it, ready to fund to get you to NRC approval. And then once you get to NRC approval, will there be capital there to build out the factory that's going to allow you to produce 100 things a year? And so company building is the same. There are certainly nuances, culture of an engineering organization, very different. Understanding the responsibilities around setting timelines and hitting those timelines versus missing them because of XYZ. You deal with much more complicated supply chains and getting some of the componentry that you have less control over. There's a whole bunch of things. But if you remember, my background's industrial engineering. And so I'm a system and process geek. I always have been. There is nothing I like more than walking into a manufacturing floor and being like, tell me how you do this.
So energy is really exciting. What about space? Sometimes I'm into it and sometimes I don't understand why everyone's excited about populating Mars.
Yeah. So I'm not the guy that's betting on mining stuff off of Mars. That's not Crosscut. I would say that everything we do in FrontierTech and climate, for that matter, is pragmatic. It's just give me a reasonable time frame where I'm still going to be alive that this is going to happen. I've been looking a lot of what I would call the picks and shovels that facilitate the commercialization of space. I'm intrigued by manufacturing things in space. I'm intrigued by re-entry technologies. I'm intrigued by the idea of space logistics, being able to put stuff up there and hit a button and have it come down and drop on a dime where it's needed. That kind of stuff fascinates me because the biggest hurdle in space has been the time to launch. Design to launch used to be 5-10 years. Now we have a company that's spinning up a brand new satellite design and has already locked in their ride share and will launch this thing in 9 months, start to finish.
Let me ask you about all those things because they were all interesting. So tell me about the design to launch, like for your antenna company, which was, you've been with a long time. Do they get their antennas onto someone else's payload? How do you, like right now, if I want to put something on a payload, I need to get it launched. I need to get it up there. What are the steps you go through?
Well, it's changed, right? So Umbra designed their entire system from scratch. That was David's background. And really his thesis at the time was the government pays for these synthetic aperture radar satellite constellations. The prime contractors bid on them, and they're going to bid the highest number they can get out of the government because they make 30 points of margin. There's no motivation to innovate.
So for them, it was getting launched. I mean, they had to build their satellite and everything, but it was, they really did everything but the launch piece of things.
Correct. And they own it. They're fully verticalized in terms of owning their constellation. Now, what's changed is if you just want to put a sensor up there, you can buy space on someone else's satellite. You can buy a standard bus from a company like Apex now. and put your payload on top. We have all these companies that are looking at the inefficiencies of satellite design to launch and saying, well, no innovative new company needs to build this piece from scratch. I'll build it as a standard. And we create these standard frameworks. So you're just seeing a massive evolution. Again, the reason it's so exciting is everything is principles first. Wipe the slate clean. Don't think about how it was done the last 40 years. If you had everything at your disposal with all this new innovation, how would you get this done, right?
But it seems sort of to me like the analogy is sort of like now you've got AWS and you've got Shopify. And so all those pieces, like I don't need to build the satellite. I don't need to launch. I don't need to do the re-entry or whatever it is.
We're not quite there yet. We're not quite at the level of AWS does everything except run my application, right? We're getting there. That is what I call the commercialization of space is unfolding. People are looking at every layer of the stack. I mean, we have companies doing debris tracking to make sure the debris doesn't hit satellites. We have companies doing tugboating, which means, SpaceX takes you up and just drops you off. They don't put you where you want to be. Well, you can burn your own fuel to get where you want to be, or you can join on to a tugboat service and get pulled where you want to be. You pay a lot for that, but you stay on mission a lot longer because you didn't burn your fuel. Every single element's being thought about. Gas stations in space, being able to refuel your satellites, like every single thing has been thought of. The question will be, do we get to enough scale where there can be viable businesses behind a lot of these things, right? So the issue with picks and shovels is generally possibly TAM. The majority of satellites going up are Starlink and then eventually Amazon Kuiper. We need to have a lot more microsatellites being launched by independent groups to make a difference.
What is the scale of all the stuff that's going into space right now? And who does it belong to?
I don't know the volume, but I know that probably 80% are Starlink satellites.
Wow. I didn't know that. So we have a funky internet connection sometimes. So I think it was Rafe who came on my podcast. Rafe from Canaan. He's been doing a lot of space and frontier investing. I think he was saying he feels like space infrastructure is at the point where they're moving to focus more on what can be done with all the data and imagery that is coming back from space. And I think what you're saying is actually you're still excited about the picks and shovels, like sort of the infrastructure building piece of things.
I'm interested in both. I think what he's referring to would end up looking more like software and analytics. And then there's issues around downlink. Obviously, like Umbra produces very large data sets, and a lot of them are not useful, yet we're still paying to get them down. Wouldn't it be cool to do GPU compute on the edge up in orbit and process it there to send it down? Well, that's AWS as a service up in orbit, basically. That's very cool. There have been a lot of analytics companies. Some of those have worked, most of them have not.
One other interesting thing you said was worrying about the TAM when you're doing picks and shovels. And I think, again, it was Rafe who was just talking about, like, one of the things he's trying to think is, will there be other primes, right? Or are we always betting on, smaller plays because no one's going to disrupt the Northrop or Lockheed or fill in your favorite prime?
Yeah, I have that same fear. And so I tend to not be excited about what looks like a supplier of something innovative that ultimately can't win without the help of a Boeing or a Northrop. I think their lobbying power is too strong to upend. The only example that people seem to point to, and I don't have a strong opinion on this, but Anduril seems to have really invested in their own lobbying capabilities. And they continue to win several programs of record in the autonomous space because none of the primes can do it, right? They just don't have it. But ultimately, for a really big program of record, I'm not so sure the big primes are going to let Anduril walk in there and snatch it. So right now, they're all relatively smaller dollar amounts, and they're not a big threat to the core contracts that the primes care about. So that seems to be the debate.
So you wouldn't invest in a company that relies on a prime. Like the companies you're investing in get their dollars without reliance on a prime.
Yes. Most of the stuff that I'm enthusiastic about is direct source, meaning the end customer is buying from them, not multiple, a multi-tier supplier system like automotive, right? I don't want to invest in the nut provider that screws the nut onto a SpaceX rocket. That doesn't seem interesting to me. It doesn't seem to be big equity outcomes. I'm not saying I have it perfect by any means. And to be honest, nobody in the space investing ecosystem really has an exit yet that can be like, see, I told you so. We're all kind of waiting around for it. I mean, I remember when I wrote that check in 2018, I was looking at the 5 firms at Silicon Valley that had bet on launch and constellations, and they're still waiting around for their liquidity events. It's going to take time. But ultimately, what I see is incredible legislative momentum behind reshoring our supply chains, reestablishing our dominance in engineering and manufacturing and build, and new approaches to how to bring speed and scale behind some of these alternative energy systems that we all know we need.
I like what you just said. Like, I feel like, yes, that seems inevitable that our country is going to prioritize these things. It's just that we're maybe by design, a slow moving bureaucracy.
Well, that we for sure are, right? But I think we look at this simply as, everyone loved consumer. They don't love consumer anymore. Then we all went enterprise SaaS, and now enterprise SaaS multiples have been dropped down. Now it's all about AI. Well, I don't think SoCal is the heartbeat of AI. That's a Silicon Valley thing. So all of these sectors had their moment. And I feel like, the frontier tech and deep tech buckets are going to have their moment. And so I want to ride those tailwinds. I also think it's the one thing that Crosscut's more uniquely positioned to do, right? Like, should I be running up to Silicon Valley and trying to elbow my way into hot LLM deals? I don't think that's a good use of Crosscut's time.
Yeah. I called it Crosscut V2. Do you think of it just as natural? Like, firms should evolve over the course of, the years, if not the decades in your case. Did you think try to rebrand it just so you become more known as FrontierTech, or is it just a natural evolution?
We debated the rebranding, and this is honestly where I get a little uncomfortable because I have to talk about us, right? But I feel like our brand means something in Southern California. I feel like we have played a role here, and I would never take credit, but we've done a lot of deals. We've backed a lot of entrepreneurs. We've thrown a lot of events. I think the Crosscut brand stands for something. And so the playbook doesn't change. It really doesn't, right? Like, show up, be present, do good work, be helpful, don't be a dick, and help companies scale. That's Crosscut's playbook.
Were there other decision points?
Decision points, you got to look at your team. Like, we need young, next gen, super plugged in, connected people that are running in the social circles where these SpaceXers are, right? As much fun as Rick, Brett, and I might be, not every 30-year-old wants to hang out with us, just being honest, right?
Yeah, I'm always interested in how to build those sourcing engines and where to, going to the tech talks, giving tech talks, being in those circles, what that looks like for different people.
Yeah, that's the other, I'll be honest, the other struggle is I said we're terrible marketers, right? We're not content producers. We're not thought leaders. We got to change that. As uncomfortable as it is for me, I have to be more public. I have to put more stuff out, right? So our Why Nuclear, Why Now white paper will be something that we put out to the broader community, as opposed to saying, hey, this is core IP and we're going to hunt around this idea. We're going to put some of this stuff out there for the world to see because it puts a stake in the ground, right? And so that's new. That's the new way of playing venture. As I said, you have to keep fine-tuning your product. And so we're doing that right now.
Although I do think it has to be authentic. It's like I talked to Suster and he's like, don't start a blog if you don't like writing. So we're talking about Crosscut 6. Are you still investing out of Crosscut 5 or are you starting Crosscut 6 now?
We are wiring our last check on Crosscut 5 probably tomorrow.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. It was a weird one because of the pandemic. And I think we would say when everyone was rah forward, we were a little bit hesitant. I think when we started seeing seed deals get done in the, mid-teens, our gut instincts were like, this is not a great time for the Crosscut to be deploying, right? We pulled back and then kind of sat on our hands, not finding anything we liked for almost like a year and a half, if I'm really honest. And at the tail end of 23 and all the way through this year, we've been deploying.
When was 5 started?
5 was technically a late 20 vintage.
So is there anything else? Otherwise, I would shift gears and ask you things about your teaching, other new stuff on your list.
No, I mean, that's the bulk of the story. As I said, the game is still the same and Crosscut's still doing what we do. And we're thrilled to be a part of the ecosystem and still want to be collaborative with everybody. We have found that the climate and energy investor community is super collaborative. We love working with other groups.
That's great. And it's like 2/3 of your investments are in LA. And
yeah.
Is that, still the hope for going forward?
What I say to that is we have to take advantage of our brand and reputation. And so we should be extremely active inside of the SoCal ecosystem. But for us, this techno manufacturing revolution is not just a SoCal thing. It's Michigan, it's outside of Denver, it's Seattle. There's a lot of space infrastructure in these markets and manufacturing infrastructure in places like Michigan. Basically, I would say non-Silicon Valley emerging ecosystems are still our bread and butter.
Yeah, very cool. And fairly recently, you started teaching at USC?
I did. I completed my first semester, I guess technically on Monday. I submitted my final grades for the quarter.
Congrats. And what were the highlights and lowlights of the semester?
The saddest thing, honestly, was I did a check-in. So these are full-time, fully employed master's program students. And, we pack a lot into 8 weeks. And I did a check-in at the beginning of a class, and like 25% of my class was in tears about the stress of their life and the stuff on their plate, and said that no professor had ever asked them how they're doing. And all of my reviews, et cetera, were like, I can't believe you did that. And I was like, man, the human side of even teaching is gone. Like I know venture gets transactional, but the human side of, even if we're connecting over Zoom, like that can't go. That has to be part of the human experience. And I just felt terrible for these 20-something-year-old kids that feel alone and feel overwhelmed and have nowhere to turn.
Do you have a good way asking people how they're doing? I'd say it's a stupid sounding question, but that's what I mean.
No, I guess, the big shift I made with my entrepreneurs was to actually specifically call out the fact that I am not asking you how the company is doing. I'm asking you how you are doing first. And if you trust me, then we're going to have a much better relationship to get to the hard stuff around how the company is doing.
I mean, I've heard you talk a few times, and like one of the messages that I heard was something like, remember that none of this actually matters. Am I misquoting you?
No, you're not. But did I say that at a party recently where you caught that versus an interview?
Or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. We're like small little specks in this massive universe. And we think everything that's happening matters, but it really doesn't. And, nobody cares about our problems. Like, we're really irrelevant. The way I got comfortable with my own drama and everything was to realize that I'm actually irrelevant, that nobody actually gives a shit about Brian Garrett. And It just makes it a lot easier to let things kind of like roll off your back. And it's hard because we're all in it. And so what I try to say from that is like, connect from your heart, not your head, love deeply, care about the experience of this small little finite time we have on earth, and make the most of the days you got, because stressing about it isn't going to make it any easier.
I love all of that. Means I don't have to stress about my crappy tennis playing this morning. Brian, I'm super excited for you to be building Crosscut VI. It feels like a great fit for you, and you're building something important, and it's getting you excited.
Yeah, honestly, same thing. Like, why keep fighting the fight if I don't have that kind of energy, right? Like, I don't need to be a venture capitalist to be a venture capitalist. I need to be a venture capitalist because I have a burning desire to have an impact and to put some companies out there that actually have a meaningful impact on these problems. And that was my wake-up call, where I was like, if I'm going to keep fighting this fight and work as hard as I do, it better be meaningful, because I can go do things. I can chase tequila. I can teach. I can travel. I can do all these things. I'm going to be an empty nester in like a year and a half when my little one goes off. And if I'm going to keep working, I better love every single minute of it.
Yeah. But loving it is different than doing something meaningful. And I feel like you have this real drive to do something meaningful.
Yeah. Thank you. I do. I don't know why. Like, if I really want to have impact only, I would just teach. I would try to teach at broad scale, but I don't know if I can have like global impact, right? If one of these nuclear companies works, it's a massive impact on decarbonization.
Yeah. I'm excited to see how Crosscut VI evolves.
Thank you, Minnie. Thanks for making time for me.